My name's Jonathan Harrison, and I had a near-death or mystical death experience in 1997, and it completely changed my life. I was on a spiritual search, on a spiritual journey of awakening for several years before that, and quite a lot of stuff happened, most of which is inexplicable and is very personal stuff. But I came to the point where in my awareness, I knew something was going to happen. And I was out one day with my wife in the car, and I said to her, just completely out of the blue, do you know I'm approaching my mystical death? I didn't even know what that really meant myself. I wasn't really conscious of the words. When they came out, they just blurted out. And so about a couple of weeks later, I was sitting outside waiting for something to happen. It was almost like I was expecting to see God come through the trees outside. We lived in this lovely place in rural France, and I just expected God in my mind to sort of come through and give me a big hug and say, welcome home. It was very bizarre, but nothing like that happened at all, unfortunately. And it came one evening, like I said, a couple of weeks later after I'd said the words, I collapsed at home and I fell to the floor and I felt myself shifting, out of my body a bit, I suppose. Now I can say that. At the time, I just thought, what's going on? And my wife came running over and I was slumped against a wall, and I looked at her and then I thought, I can't hold this. I can't hold being in the body. And I just went straight out my crown and I just hovered on the ceiling above my body and my wife holding my body, which was a bit strange, of course. And my first reaction was panic and anxiety. As a human being and as a body, I'm just, what the hell's going on? And then only a few moments later, I had this feeling of the anxiety dropping away and this beautiful sort of ocean of peace coming, and just feeling quite good, and began to like it, actually. And I thought, this is really nice. And then all of a sudden, it just kind of went into a sort of, I suppose, like a oneness kind of experience. I suppose you would call it that, in that I felt totally at peace. I felt completely at harmony with everything. I felt I was in everything and everything was me. So it was like a universal experience in that respect. And I was expecting to go in some way in my head. I thought, oh yeah, I'm going on now. And then my wife was so upset. I was kind of like in between two worlds. So I could see my wife clearly. It's like one of those stories where they're on the operating table, and they die and then they come back. I was certainly in this in-between stage of leaving. But what it did do was give me this wonderful high and this wonderful zest for life that I had no idea really existed. But I remember feeling things like, I wish somebody would have told me about this beforehand because it's so beautiful. And then I thought, it's not like thinking now thoughts, but it's just a very subtle kind of gentle, this is the same for everybody. This is not about me. This is about what happens when you step back from your body, perhaps when you die, for example. So this really feeling of beauty and definite separation between myself and the body, and being very aware how upset my wife was. She was crying and it felt like I could feel what she was thinking, which seemed to me to be, oh no, what the hell am I going to do? I can't cope with this. I've got to get an ambulance and diddly-diddly. What happens if he dies and blah, blah, blah. We had no eye contact. I was literally looking at her from the ceiling and I had my eyes shut as a body. It felt like a heart, like a heart space called, oh, I don't want her to be like that. It just felt like that. And as soon as that happened, this kind of click back into the body occurred very shortly after. So it was noticing, instead of enjoying what I was enjoying, it was noticing her suffering and thinking, I don't want her to be suffering. I'm having a great time myself, so I don't want her to be suffering there. And once that thought kind of stayed in my head, that's when I came back into my body. And I looked at her and I just said, that's all right. I'm not going to die tonight. And I just knew. And she was just going, let's get an ambulance. Let's go, oh my God, what's happened to you? You probably had a seizure, a heart attack. And I said, no, I'm not going to die tonight. I just absolutely knew, the absolute sort of knowing. So that kind of episode kind of came to an end at God knows what time, at 11 or 12 o'clock at night, something like that. And we sat up for hours because I was just like, I suppose I was in shock, but I was still completely out there. So it was kind of interesting. So I went from this kind of oneness or universal consciousness, through what seemed to be layers of consciousness. It's almost like I went from oneness back into duality. And I went through from oneness down into a sort of soul space, if you like. All I could see were these orbs and spheres that contained stories or life stories. And I was able to go into that just by will and sort of nose around a bit and think, oh, that's that guy's story. Okay, that's his, oh, that's her story. They were people that I never knew. One of them I went into, it felt like was a past life, although I'm not into past lives. And it was a monk, which kind of makes a lot of sense. And I experienced this kind of like medieval monk. And his biggest regret was that he misunderstood that he was trying to do the right thing, but like withdrawing from being celibate and things like that and having a sort of kind of rigorous denying lifestyle was in the end not fruitful. So it was a very powerful little flick into this thing. And I just saw pictures of him and feelings. So it was like you're going into a soul. It's what it felt like to me. And I thought, oh my God, this is something to do with me. You know, that's what it felt like. And then the other one, really random, where we used to sit and in the old days of channeling and things like that, and which I stumbled into, and I didn't really want to be a channel. And I felt it was like a stepping stone, which I still believe that's true. But I was with somebody that was suffering. They'd had loss. They'd lost their sister. And I just opened up completely. In simple words, it felt like I opened my heart and I was just with person, and I could see over on the left of my eyes this like a golden orb, a globe. And as I looked at that, I intuited that that was my soul. That's how it felt, because I was not doing anything, because I've been channeling, mediumship and all those kind of things. So I'd stepped aside in my understanding, and then this sort of orb is there, and oh, that's me. That was just immediate thought, which kind of tied up with what I experienced later on with the, coming down from the death experience. So orbs, there's a lot, there's so much on orbs. I'm not into all the rubbish photos, but as a direct seeing of something and feeling energy, yeah, it's very, very true. I thought, this is weird, but I'm just going to go with it. And I kind of just dropped down and down. And the next day I thought, well, what do I do now? What do I, because I had no idea what was going on and what happened. And I was still on a very expanded and expansive state of consciousness. And just this little voice of creativity just said, well, start writing. So you've got to write it down. It's almost like in case you forget it sort of thing. So I wrote it down. Although I'd never written a book, it just seemed a natural way of releasing this sort of, you're pregnant with consciousness, You're literally birthing something and you've just got to do it. So it was just a natural process. And I think you're right, from a psychological perspective, it was a way of dealing with it because it didn't really make sense to your old sort of way of thinking. For most people, it doesn't make sense today. So yeah, it was probably a mixture of the two, like my personality, being creative, and a way of beginning healing of a traumatic situation. I didn't really write down what happened. It's just all this stuff came out. It's like regurgitating stuff that I seemingly collected. And I ended up like 6 days later with a book, which I then self-published. And that kind of started me on a journey as an author. And I continued writing books and I wrote for magazines. And so that's really how it all started. I definitely had some sense of finding union, but it wasn't about religion. It was just about what I'd stumbled into. I was brought up a Christian, I suppose, in southern England, but I became interested in all the other religions because I started to see that they all were saying the same thing. And the examples of certain personalities, shall we say, had a common thread. There's a perennial truth that links all religions. And so that's what I was interested in, is finding that. I was experiencing that to a degree, and I wanted to know the truth. I think that was I didn't want to be feeding myself information, put it that way. So again, that's not an environment I grew up with or knew anything about. I just realized I should experience it and let it go. Same as anything, just not get too identified with it and just see where it goes, just see how far it goes. I think the truth that I was looking for and the truth that I found are probably different, because the initial truth you're looking for is very much sort of ego bound. It's got more to do with me and I and what I'm about. And well, that makes me special. And it's normal, it's okay. But later on, I found out that I wasn't the first person to have that experience, or many far more deeper experiences. So yeah, it changed from being a personal thing to being it's the same for everybody. And that's one of the most important things about these type of experiences, is that if you treat them purely and you don't load them up with all the religious stuff you've got hanging around you, I think it can be quite healing and growing and nurturing, and it can be very beautiful because you're not restricted by the concepts of any specific religion. So you're free to experience more of the truth, maybe, than somebody who's not. When I first had some of the other experiences, I suppose they're called siddhis in the in the Hindu religion, and in Vedanta and things like that. You have these experiences that are inexplicable, that are spontaneous healings or things like that, little miracles, I suppose. And that completely changes your perception of life. And you start to think, I think quite normally, that you're special, which is I'm laughing now because I realize that nobody's special, and that's how it appears to me now. And this is the important point I'm trying to raise again, is about we're all the same. We're all one, which was the first book I wrote after those few nights, was We Are All One. A bit corny, but that was the essence of what experience was, that you, I, and everybody else have this same essential self that we don't really know a lot about. I can put all those experiences that I had, including the near-death experience or mystical death experience, you can put them into any religious belief system you want, because they'll fit in. The Christian will say, oh, that's your soul. And the Hindu will say something else. Oh, no, that's, I think what's really interesting is trying to have an independent view that's neutral and that crosses over. So somebody from China, Australia, America, or Belgium will know what you mean. I think that's a really interesting thing, because that's what we need to do. We need to get to a place where we can work together, not just as a country and not just as a society and a country or a religion, but as a world. It's a very simple thing. It's just going to take probably quite a long time. But that's surely where we're going if we're going to live here, live on this wonderful planet for years to come. We've got to change, we've got to grow, and we are. And the way we grow is by sharing, like this, stories, and people saying, oh, I never knew that. I'd like to know more about it. Education, isn't it? So